Parsha Illuminated for Parshas Acharei Kedoshim. We have another double Parsha this week. We'll get another one in 2 weeks from now. So we'll begin at the beginning, Parshas Acharei, and then we'll hopefully share something from Parshas Kedoshim as well. So the first idea I want to share with you is really regarding the first pasuk, the first verse, and I am just repeating it over from Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein, who sang his Parsha share this week, but I thought it was a fascinating idea and wanted to share it. It's just a new way to read this verse that I was not aware of. That's really, I guess, right there in Rashi. So the Parsha begins with really this Parsha Acharei for the beginning at least is about the Kohen Gadol's service on Yom Kippur, the high priest service. So it begins the following: Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, Acharei Moshe b'nei Aaron, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, Bikarvasam lifnei Hashem vayamusu, when they drew near before Hashem and they died. So it's referring to the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, which occurred back in Parsha Shmini. We had a little break of Tazria Mitzorah, and now it references back, and it says that God spoke to Moshe after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, basically, the two sons of Aaron. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, Daber al Aaron achicha, speak to Aaron your brother, Vayavo b'chol Yisrael HaKodesh, mi beis laparoches. He shouldn't come at any time into the Kodesh, into the holy, within the parochos, within the divine curtain, meaning into the Holy of Holies, al panei kaparas asher al Aaron, to the kaparas, which was the cover for the Aaron, for the ark, v'lo yamus, and then he won't die if he doesn't come just randomly. Ki be'anan yera kaparas, for I appear over the ark cover in a cloud. It's a very holy place. He shouldn't just come whenever he wants. Rather, as the verse continues, it says, Bizos yavo Aharon el HaKodesh. In the following manner should Aaron come, and it goes on to describe how Aaron is allowed to come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, many understand that Aaron HaKohen was only allowed to do this on Yom Kippur, and it was only one day a year that he could do this. And that was certainly the case for the Kohanim Gedolim, the high priest that followed Aaron HaKohen. There is the opinion of the Vilna Gaon that actually Aaron HaKohen could enter any time he wanted, as long as he went through the process that's described in this parsha. But that's a side point. So what we have is verse number 1, Pasuk Aleph, in chapter 16, it says, and Hashem spoke to Moshe after the deaths of Nadav and Abihu. And in verse 2, it says, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, speak to Aaron and tell him he can't come in any time. And this is how Bizos, it's in the following way that he may enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Now Rashi comments on the first pasuk. He asked, Ma Talmud Omar, what does this teach us? And then Rashi quotes the Medrash that gives a mashal, that gives a parable, a metaphor to understand what's going on here. Haya Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah moshlo mashal. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah will use a parable to explain. L'chole shenichnas etzel rofe. You have a sick person and a doctor comes in. Amar lo, the doctor says, al tochal tzonein v'al tishka b'tachav. Don't eat cold food. Don't lie in a cold place. And those are the doctor's instructions. And the guy says, okay, maybe I'll listen, maybe I won't. Thank you, doctor. Ba acher ve'amar lo. Another doctor comes in and says, al tochal tzonein v'al tishka b'tachav. Don't eat cold and don't lie and don't sleep in cold, damp places. Shelo tamus kederech shemes ploni. So that you don't die like so-and-so died for not following my instructions when I told him not to eat cold food and lying in a damp place. The second one obviously is more impactful than the first one because he gave an example of how not following the instructions was detrimental to another person. That's why it says after the deaths of the children of Aaron. So Rashi says, what is this teaching us that goes after the death of the children of Aaron? Says Rashi, says the Medrash, that Hashem, through Moshe, is giving, I guess, Moshe an instruction, giving Aaron an instruction that you should not enter the Holy of Holies just on your own, but rather there's a specific way that you have to do so. And if you don't, then you're going to die. And the proof is that this is what happened to Nadav and Avihu. Now, what seems to emerge from this Rashi actually is that this Medrash is understanding that Hashem is telling Moshe and referencing the deaths of Nadav and Avihu right now. Meaning, if you would read this verse on a simple level, you would probably read it that it's telling you when Hashem spoke to Moshe. When did Hashem speak to Moshe? After the deaths of the children of Aaron, the sons of Aaron. And then he gives him the instructions for what to do. It's just telling you when it happened. But according to this Medrash, it seems that he's not just telling him when, but he's actually mentioning the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. Because that's the whole mashal, is that he's not just telling him that if you don't follow instructions, you're going to die. He's telling him if you don't follow instructions, you're going to die, like Nadav and Avihu. And he's mentioning the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. That's what seems would emerge from this Medrash. Now, is that something that we can derive from the pasuk, from the verse, or not? So the Re'im, the Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi, one of the first super commentaries on Rashi, explains that this is very much being read into the pshat, into the simple reading of this verse. Because it says, and if you look in the Medrash, it's maybe even a bit more clear, because Rashi says, Ma Talmud Lomar, what is this teaching us? The Medrash that Rashi is quoting actually says, Ein anu yodim ma nemer lo bidvar harishon. We don't know what he said in the first speech. In other words, if you pay attention, verse number 1 says, and Hashem spoke to Moshe after the deaths of the children of Aaron. But what did he say? It doesn't say what he said. The next verse says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. And Hashem said to Moshe. Well, we already said he spoke to Moshe. Why are we repeating that Hashem spoke to Moshe? So, verse number 1 says, and God spoke to Moshe. And verse number 2 says, and Hashem said to Moshe. Well, then what did he say in verse number 1? It doesn't tell us. It doesn't seem to tell us. It just tells us when. And Hashem spoke to Moshe after the deaths. And Hashem said to Moshe. Well, what did he say after verse number 1? It doesn't say. So the answer, according to this reading, says Rabbi Eliezer Mizrahi, says the Re'im, is Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe. You know what Hashem said to Moshe? Acharei Moshe b'nei Aaron. He said, Acharei, after, or Acharei can actually be understood to mean not after, but because of, or insofar as. We find that when Yosef speaks to Paro and tells him, interprets his dream, and says, you need to appoint someone who's very wise over your kingdom. So Paro says to Yosef, Acharei hodia Elokim es kozos in navam chacham kamocha. Since, or insofar as Hashem has told you all this, there's nobody more wise than you. The word acharei can mean not after, but it can actually mean like because of. And so this leads us to a possible reading of this pasuk, which is very novel and very different, and actually something I never thought of or never heard of before. I guess I never really processed. I was aware of this Rashi and this Medrash, but I never really thought it through. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, and what did he say? He said, Acharei Moshe b'nei Aaron, insofar as the two sons of Aaron died, when they came close to Hashem, and they died, so now I'm going to give you further instructions. But the introduction is the reminder of what happened. There's a question that the Re'im deals with, is the order of how he said it. Is it in order? Is it not in order? But this is being said, this is being spoken, acharemos. It's not telling you the time when he said it. Again, that's the most simple reading of the verse, certainly. But the way that Rashi, and Rashi, by the way, goes with the pshat. Rashi likes to go with the simple reading. But if something is pushing him, then he's gonna, the simple reading can be not as simple as you thought. So over here, because it doesn't say what he said, it must be this is what he said. Hashem said to Moshe after, insofar as the deaths of the children of Aaron. Robert.
It seems a little funny to me because um, Nadav and Avihu didn't go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, so it
Well, that's a major question: is did they or did they not?
I mean,
So,
well, there's a lot of different, a lot of attempts to explain what they did, but I've never seen one that said that they went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and certainly there's nothing in the Pshat to suggest that. That would be a problematic also because then their cousins were supposed to drag their bodies out, but if they died in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, then their cousins wouldn't be able to go in and do that. So, um, I mean, it's still, I mean, you could say they were careless in how they approached worshiping Hashem and died because of it. So Aaron has to be careful. It's not completely, completely nonsensical or anything, but um, you it would make more sense if it was literally the same thing. It was being cautioned against the same thing that Nadav and Avihu had done literally.
um, one second. Yeah, the so this would be going. So it's actually one of the opinions of the Tanaim of what they did wrong is that they entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So this
Okay,
and it's because of this, really, not because of this specific reading, but because of the beginning of this parsha, which implies
I
that's
hadn't
where it would
heard.
be derived from. Okay, so okay, so that's just a very novel and new way to read this first pasuk. Now, just to add one more wrinkle, so Rabbi Bernstein said that with this, one can answer a question raised by Tosfos in Maseches Gittin. So the Gemara in Gittin, I put on the source sheet, the Gemara lists, it says, Amar Rabbi Levi, Shmona Parshios Nemru Bayom Shukam Mishkan. There were 8 sections of the Torah. Parshios here doesn't mean like a parsha like we think of it. It means a section, a topic. There were 8 topics that were taught to Moshe on the day that the Mishkan was put up. And it lists off what those sections are. They all have to do with the service in the Mishkan, that even though they might appear in the Torah later, but seemingly they had to know these things from day one of the Mishkan. So it makes sense that they were all taught from the beginning of the Mishkan. Now, on that list, it lists a whole bunch of things. On that list is Uparshas Acharemos, our Parsha, Acharemos. Now, by the way, this is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of Nisan. This is Acharemos is most relevant for Yom Kippur, so not for a while. But it's still relevant to know what not to do. So it's relevant really from day one that don't enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim unless you do this. Now, again, according to the Vilna Gaon, it's relevant from day one because it is a way from day one that one can enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But anyways, so the Aaron could at least. But so on the list of the 8 topics that were taught on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of Nisan, the day the Mishkan was put up, is this parsha, this section of the Torah of Acharemos. Now, the Torah tells us when it was taught, right? It says it was taught Acharemos, after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, which was that day. Now, which was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now, but Tosfos raises an interesting question. Tosfos there says that we find in the Midrash in Bereshis, a dispute, two opinions as to what the word acharei connotes. Meaning sometimes it says achar and sometimes it says acharei. And one opinion in the Medrash is that achar means like immediately after, and acharei means later. And the other opinion is the opposite. No, acharei means immediately after, and achar means at a later time. Now, if this is the same day that Nadav and Avihu died, then seemingly this is immediately after. Acharei mos is immediately after. This would imply that acharei, it means immediately after. And seemingly this would raise a question on the other opinion that said that acharei means later. This is certainly that same day, and God spoke to Moshe, acharei mos, after the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. This would seem to be a proof that acharei means much later. Immediately after, and not later. So Tosfos answers, well, no, it could mean later, and it wasn't much later, but it was the last of the 8 parshas taught. So it was later, as later in the day as it could have been. It was the latest, so that's why it's acharei. But said Rabbi Bernstein, according to our interpretation of the word acharei, then this whole discussion doesn't start. Because when would we debate whether acharei means immediately after or much later? That's only if it means after, right? If it's telling you a chronological point about when something happened. But the way that we're reading this verse now, according to Rashi, according to this Rashi's interpretation of Rashi, acharei here doesn't mean after. It means because of or insofar. And Hashem spoke to Moshe, and he told him, acharei mos, it's because Nadav and Avihu died, so you have to be super careful. And so according to this, then that question doesn't start. There's no proof anymore. There's no indication from here that the word acharei would mean either immediately after or only later, because in this context, according to this reading, it doesn't mean after, rather it means because of or insofar. So I thought this was a very fascinating idea that really completely changes the meaning of this verse. But in truth, it's basically in Rashi, in this Medrash that Rashi's quoting, that's telling us that part of what Hashem said to Moshe was, Nadav and Avihu died, and you have to be extra careful because of that. That's going to teach you, that's going to remind you that much more than just giving instructions, but giving instructions that say, and you saw what happened to them, that's much more powerful, and that was part of the statement here in this very first verse. Okay, moving on to Pasuk Daled, verse 4, continuing on, and now it begins to discuss how the Kohen Gadol how the high priest is to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the verse says, Kisones, it's the bottom of page 1 on the source sheet, Kisones bad Kodesh Yilbash. So he should wear a kisones of linen, a linen shirt, umichnes sevad, and linen pants, uvavneit bad, and a linen belt, umitznefes bad, and a linen hat. And that's how he's going to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, on Yom Kippur. Rashi tells us over there that this teaches us that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he went into the Holy of Holies, he didn't wear all the priestly garments, because normally the Kohen Gadol had 8 garments, and here only 4 are being listed. What's missing? So what's missing is all the ones that contain gold. All of the garments that contain gold, he is not going to wear. He's only wearing white. Says Rashi, Lefi she'en kategar na'aseh sanegar, because the accuser does not become the defendant. And here, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is entering the Holy of Holies to atone and to defend the Jewish people. And he doesn't want to bring gold in, which reminds God of the golden calf. And so the gold is left out. In Kategar, Na'aseh sanegar, the accuser does not become the defendant. So there are a couple of questions we can ask on this. Number 1, why not design clothing that of all 8 garments that just doesn't have gold in them, specifically for Yom Kippur? Let him wear all 8 garments, but redesign them. In fact, the belt that he wore was redesigned for Yom Kippur. It was a special belt because normally the belt that he wore was not white, and on Yom Kippur it was white. So why not redesign the the ephod, the apron, and the choshen, the breastplate, and the tzitz, the head plate that had the words Kodesh LaHashem, holy unto God. Why not redesign these in such a way that they just didn't have any gold, and then he could wear all the 8 garments? That's one question. Another question we could ask is, so if we're so careful on Yom Kippur, it seems, this is something specific to Yom Kippur that we don't want him to wear his gold vestments. Fine. But why only in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? The Kohen Gadol would change back and forth. When he was doing service in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, he would only wear white. When he came back out, he would change into his regular clothes. Why? Why was it okay to wear gold garments outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it was specifically in the Kodesh HaKadoshim that he could not wear the gold because of this reason, that the accuser cannot become the defendant. We don't want him wearing gold. Seemingly that should apply even outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So Reb Zalman Sorotzkin in Aznaim LaTorah asks both of these questions, and we'll begin with the first question. The first question was, why not design the other garments, which usually have gold, in such a way that they don't have gold? Just make them out of linen or some other material. So, or some other metal even. The metal ones could be out of a different metal. Then they won't be gold. So Reb Sorotzkin suggests that actually they weren't needed. I guess what he would be saying is the primary reason to remove them is because they have gold. But if they were really needed, then we would design ones that don't have gold. But in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Kohen Gadol did not need these garments. He says the tzitz, which was the head plate of the Kohen Gadol, which had the words Kodesh LaHashem, holy unto God, on it, the purpose of that was really to remind the Kohen Gadol to focus on that concept, and really to remind others also to focus on that concept of holy unto God, really to focus on what they're doing, that this is the service of God. And he says that's not needed in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's the Kohen Gadol is not going to lose focus, and there's nobody who's in there with him that would see or wouldn't see those words on his head plate, and therefore it's not needed. Even the other things, the other items that had the stones. So let's say the ephod had 2 stones on the back. Each one had 6 of the tribes written on it. The choshen the breastplate had all the 12 tribes. Those were to remind the Kohen Gadol who he's working for, who he's atoning for. But when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he doesn't need that. He's very mission focused. He knows exactly what he's going for. He doesn't need any reminders. He knows he's going to atone for the Jewish people. Maybe you can add, it's like a one-day thing. The reminders are needed when you're doing something, it's kind of the same thing every day. This is something very unique and very special, and he didn't need it when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He didn't need that reminder. And even the name of God, which was written on the Urim V'Tumim and inserted into the breastplate, that was inserted into the Choshen. So again, that's to remind him of God's presence, but he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He's in the Holy of Holies, and he's as close to Hashem's presence, as close to the Shekhinah as is humanly possible, and standing right in front of the ark and the place where Hashem's Shekhinah dwells, and therefore that also wasn't needed. And so, says Reb Sorotzkin, these additional garments, although if there was no reason to take them off, we wouldn't take them off and say, oh, you don't need them, so just take them off. but because there's a reason to take them off, which is we don't want to bring gold into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the Holy of Holies, so they're removed, and it's not necessary to create replacements for them, specifically for the Kodesh HaKadoshim, because all the messages that they are meant to impart and meant to remind the Kohen Gadol of, he won't need when he goes to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He'll be able to focus. That's what he suggests. Now, in terms of the other question, which is why only when he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim did he need to remove the gold, but not when he was doing the service out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, just in the Kodesh, in the Heichal, in the place where the Mizbeach was, and the Menorah, and in the Azara, in the courtyard where he brought the Karbanos. Why was it okay to wear gold then? What about in Kategar and Asas Anegar, that the accuser cannot become the defendant? So to this he has a very fascinating suggestion. And he goes on a bit of a, I don't want to say a rant, but he takes issue with certain people and certain practices. He says, in recent times, there are people who demonstrate themselves as people full of love and love of Jews. Oh, have Yisrael. They say we love every Jew. And then in parentheses it says Hashem should protect us from these types of love, of those people who love Jews like this. He says, what do they say? They protest any attempt to rebuke or guide, redirect the tzibur, the congregation. They say you can't announce, you can't publicize anything that people are doing wrong. Rather, they say, be like Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, famously the great Hasidic Rebbe, who was always rationalizing and justifying the status of the people before God, story after story, and really in his Sefer, line after line, paragraph after paragraph, where he praises the Jewish people, and he turns to God and beseeches God. Just as one example, the people are talking in shul. He turns to Hashem. He says, "How amazing your people are! They come to shul to talk. They don't talk other places. They come into the shul at least they come to shul. So that type of thing. So, and many other, stories and stories and stories that are like that. How could you blame them? It's so hard. They go through so much. So says Rav Zalman Tzarek, these people, they say, oh, we're being like Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and we're justifying everything that people do, and nobody should call anyone out for wrongdoing. And he says there's a mitzvah in the Torah to rebuke. Now, how it's done, it has to be done very carefully. Rebuke doesn't mean yell at people. It means guide, it means teach, it means clarify. But not to just say everything goes, and not to say that everything is good and whatever people do is fine. It's not always the case. So he says that the mitzvah, the commandment of tochacha, of rebuke, is almost like gone by the wayside. Because whatever people do, these people say, oh, we love Jews, whatever they do is good, and that's it. But he says that's not how it's supposed to be. Then there's no growth, there's no improvement, there's no guidance and clarification. And if we see somebody who's doing wrong, so it's our job to protest as much as we can. Again, it depends on the situation, how to do it. We have to try to find a way that would be effective, and maybe it takes time. It takes building a relationship. But we don't just say everything goes. And certainly the leaders of the Jewish people, the rabbanim, the rabbis, their congregations, it's their job to direct and guide, and not to just say we love Jews and everything's okay. So he says, so where is the place for limud zchus? Limud zchus means justification, rationalization, explaining away our actions. What's the place for that, and what's the place for rebuke and clarification and redirection? He says the difference is who you're speaking to. When the rabbi is speaking to the congregation, to the people, then it's his job to direct them, to teach them, to guide them, to help them improve. When he's speaking before God, it's his job to rationalize and to justify and say, Hashem, look how wonderful these people are. They try so hard. They're doing great to find terutzim, to find answers, to find justifications. He says that's what Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev did. The stories about Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev are not where he turned to the people and he said, everything you're doing is fine. You don't need to improve. I love you so much, and just and just keep on going the way you're going. That's not the stories. The stories are where he turned to Hashem and he said, Hashem, how hard your people try. Please spare them. Please help them. That's where, when we're speaking before God, when we're speaking to Hashem, that's where there's room for justifying and rationalizing behavior that's maybe not up to par. But when we're speaking to the people, so we don't say it's enough, it's good enough. We say we help elevate and teach and clarify and guide. He says this is the difference that we see in the Kohen Gadol's clothes on Yom Kippur. When the Kohen Gadol was in the public eye, when the Kohen Gadol was in the courtyard bringing the offerings, he wore the gold. He wore the sin on his sleeve, so to speak. He wore the gold outright. He's not trying to hide it. He's not trying to justify it. So that's because we're not going to sweep the sin under the rug and pretend that we make no mistakes. No, we have to be aware and we have to know what we need to work on. We have to remind them what we did and how careful we need to be and how much we need to improve. That's when he's working out in the public. But when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, out of sight of the people, just him and Hashem, so now he goes into the other mode. Now he goes into limud zchus mode. Now he goes into justification and rationalization. Hashem, put aside, forget about the golden calf, forget about the sins of the people. They're trying their best. They're trying to do tshuva. Look how well they're doing. So that's where no longer is there a place for rebuke, and now it's the Kohen Gadol's job to find terutzim, to find justifications, to find rationalizations before God to try to achieve atonement. And that's why in the Kodesh HaKadoshim we say Ein kategar nasas hanegar. You should not bring the accuser. You shouldn't bring gold into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the Holy of Holies, when you're trying to achieve atonement before God. But when the Kohen Gadol is in the public eye, so then he can't hide their sins from them. They have to be aware of them and know where they need to improve. And therefore, out in the public eye, the Kohen Gadol would still wear his gold garments. Very fascinating answer to this question, which really is a question that I think I've been wondering about for a while. Hi, Miriam. Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi, I really like this take on the garment of the Kohen Gadol, because I heard other teachings saying that you have to be humble when you come to Hashem, the simplest way that you come. But this take that you shared really sits well with me, and I appreciate
Nice.
that. Thank you.
Right. You're making a good point. That's the other idea is of him going in white on Yom Kippur is just like, right, the most simple, nothing, that's the another perspective. Right. Good. Okay. Moving on to Parshas Kedoshim. We'll share one thought from Parshas Kedoshim, and we turn to chapter 19, Pasuk Gimel, where it says, Ish imo v'aviv tiro. Chapter 19, verse 3, Ish imo v'aviv tiro. A man should fear his mother and his father. Veshabsosai tishmoru, and they should guard my Shabbos. Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem, your God. So we should note a few things in this verse. The change from singular to plural, right? It says, every man, ish, well, it doesn't say every, it says ish, a man shall fear his mother and his father. But tira'u, the verb, is plural, right? So that teaches us they shall fear. When it says ish, it doesn't just mean a man, it also means a woman. A woman also has to fear her parents, being awe of them. And then it says, ve'esh shabsosai tishmoru, and they shall keep the Shabbos. So who's they? Again, we started with ish, a man, but now we're saying they shall keep the Shabbos. So we have to note these differences. So that's number one, the shift from singular to plural. And secondly, what's the connection here? The beginning of the verse says, you should fear your parents, being awe of your parents. There are specific halachos related to that, what that means. And then it says, and you shall keep the Shabbos. So what's the connection between fearing one's parents? Again, yira of parents has to do with like not singing their seed and not contradicting them and things like that. So what does that have to do with guarding the Shabbos? So Rashi says, Samach Shabbos l'mora'av, the Torah juxtaposed Shabbos with fearing one's father or parents. Lomar, to tell you, afal pi sheizarticha mora'av, even though I commanded you to fear your parents, im yomar lecha chalas Shabbos, if your parent would tell you to violate Shabbos, al tishmalo, don't listen. V'chein b'shar kol mitzvos, and so too with all other mitzvos. Ani Hashem elkeichem, I am Hashem your God. Ata ve'avicha chayavim b'chlodi, you're both obligated in my honor. Lefikach lo tishmalo levatos dvaris, therefore don't listen to him to violate my words. So says Rashi that the reason why these are juxtaposed, these two things are together, is to tell you that even though I'm telling you to listen to your parents, but not if it contradicts what I say. And if a parent would tell you to violate the Shabbos, do not listen to them, do not violate the Shabbos. And then Rashi says, based on the Gemara, and so too for all other mitzvos. And the pasuk concludes, I am Hashem your God, that you're both obligated to listen to me, so you have to listen to me. Now, this seems to contradict another teaching from Parshas Vayakel. Because in Parshas Vayakel, we also have a juxtaposition of Shabbos with the building of the Mishkan. And there it says to keep the Shabbos, and then it says to build the Mishkan. And Rashi there says, from the fact that Shabbos is mentioned before the Mishkan, it tells you that Shabbos takes precedent over the building of the Mishkan, that the building of the Mishkan does not override Shabbos. Since Shabbos comes first, so Shabbos takes precedent over building the Mishkan. Well, if whatever comes first takes precedent, so that seems to contradict what we're saying over here. Here we're saying that it first says, fear your parents, listen to your parents, and then it says, keep the Shabbos. Well, whatever comes first takes precedent. It should be teaching you that even if your parent says to violate Shabbos, you have to listen to them, because it's first. So there seems to be a contradiction here. Number one. Number two, we'll add, why, if we accept Rashi, which we will, the Gemara, that no, Shabbos, that it's teaching you that Shabbos overrides honoring your parents. Well, and then it says, and so too for all other mitzvahs. Well, why was it taught specifically by Shabbos? We could have said about any mitzvah. Why is Shabbos the mitzvah in which we're taught that if your parent tells you to violate a mitzvah, you don't listen to them? Why is Shabbos the example? So the Kli Yakar, commenting on this Rashi, answers both of these questions. So with regards to the first question, in terms of the order, that earlier in Vayakel, Rashi said we follow that which comes first takes precedent. So over here it's different, he says, because here it begins with singular, ish, a person must fear his father and mother, and then it says, and keep the Shabbos. So he says, I understand it says, tira'u, you shall fear in the plural, because it means a man and a woman. But why does it say, Tishmoru, they shall keep the Shabbos. Why does it say that in the plural? It should say Tishmor, he should keep the Shabbos. Why does it say in the plural? The answer is because it's talking not just to the person, but also to the father and mother. Ish imo ve'aviv tiro, ve'shapsosei tishmor, a man shall fear his parents, and they all together should guard the Shabbos. Meaning, they all have to guard the Shabbos. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. You all are required to guard my Shabbos. And therefore, that itself teaches us that you must listen, since the father and mother are also obligated to guard the Shabbos, then Shabbos overrides their instruction, and you do not listen to them if they tell you to violate the Shabbos. Now, with regards to why is it specifically Shabbos for that we have this instruction, why is this teaching found by Shabbos if it's true by all the mitzvos? So the Kli Yakar says, well, all the other mitzvahs is obvious. Of course, if your parent tells you to violate a mitzvah, you don't listen to them. Why would you think that you listen to a parent over God? But when a parent tells you to violate Shabbos, so what they're saying is that what is Shabbos? Shabbos is the testimony that Hashem created the world, and that we all come from Hashem. That Hashem is the source of everything. So if they're telling you to violate Shabbos, what they're really saying is Hashem didn't create the world. Hashem's not the source of everything. Don't listen to him, listen to me. Well, if he tells you that, you take away the root, so then maybe you should listen to the parent. The parent is telling you that, no, I'm your parent. I'm the source. I'm your only source. There's no Shabbos. There's no creator. I'm your only source. So listen to me. So there, you might have thought to listen. Torah says don't listen. But if for any other mitzvah, if they have not uprooted the other source, right? If Shabbos is still intact, as long as Shabbos is intact, then we know that Hashem is our creator. And if we know Hashem is our creator, then of course, if our parent tells us to violate Hashem's will, we don't listen because our creator says to do it. He's the creator of not just us, but of them too. So it's specifically by Shabbos that a child might have this tension, this feeling. Well, if my parent is telling me that to violate Shabbos, they're really telling me there's no creator. If there's no creator, then I should listen to my parent. They're my only creator, not God. That's where a person might be tempted to listen. That's why specifically here, the Torah needs to tell us, don't listen to the parent. Listen, there is a creator, there is a Shabbos, and you should, and therefore don't listen to the parent, you should not violate the Shabbos. But by other mitzvos, it's obvious, of course. Why would you think if there's a creator, and your creator says to do something, and your parent says to do something else, of course, you must listen to the one who created both you and your parents. So that explains, according to Rashi, the connection, and really according to the Gemara, the connection between these two things. One should fear his parents and listen to his parents and guard the Shabbos, but not listen to their parents at the expense of Shabbos or any other mitzvah. That if a parent tells one to violate a mitzvah, then we don't listen. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky has another explanation. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says that if a person doesn't believe in the creator, doesn't believe in Shabbos, a person doesn't believe in a creator, so then they're accepting that there was no creation of man. So what are we saying? We just evolved from a tiny piece of bacteria, and that's it. So, and then we went through a stage of we were monkeys, and now we're humans. We went through all these stages of evolution. So who's more developed? Me or the previous generation? So I'm more developed. I've evolved. The previous generation is something less. Each generation we become greater and greater. So why should I honor the previous generation? They should be honoring me. I'm the evolved. I'm the greater creation. I'm the more sophisticated. That's if you don't believe in a creator. But if you believe in a creator, and you believe that Adam Arishon is the formation of God, that God formed him with his hands, then there's nothing greater than that. And each generation we get further away from the man whom God formed with his very hands, then the previous generation is greater than us and should be honored. And he says, therefore, therefore, the instruction to listen to our parents is coupled with the instruction to keep the Shabbos, because Shabbos reminds us there's a creator, and the idea of a creator reminds us that he created man, and that each generation that passes, we're further and further away from the creation of man. We're getting less and less. Our stature is diminishing as we move further away, and therefore we're to honor the previous generation more than our own. But if you believe it that we evolve from monkeys, then we're becoming greater and greater. It's for the previous generation to honor us. And there's a famous story that goes with this, that Yaakov Kamenetsky was once on an airplane with a professor, a Jewish professor, but not a believer. And I think he had some grandchildren on the flight with him or something, and they kept coming over and seeing if he needed anything. And this is Rabbi Yaakov's grandchildren. And the professor was astounded. He said, my grandchildren don't treat me this way. They don't show me the same respect. So Rabbi Yaakov told him over this idea. He said, that's because you, who believe in evolution, so you teach your children that you came from an ape, and they're getting greater and greater. So why would they honor you? But I teach my children that we are the formation of God's handiwork, that Adam Arishon, and we're moving further and further away, and therefore we're to honor the previous generation, and that's why they honor me more than themselves. Okay, with that, we will wish you a great day.
Thank you,
Wow,
Rabbi.
that was good.